This begins the Chapter 3, Introduction to Culture, Part 3 of 3. So, how are norms recognized and followed? To sustain societal stability, norms must be both recognized and accepted as a necessary part of society by the majority of its members. A means in which norms can present in this manner is through the use of sanctions, which are penalties and rewards for a conduct concerning a social norm. Sanctions determine the likelihood of whether a behavior will continue, decrease, or be totally eliminated. If a sanction is perceived as positive, resulting in a reward, the likelihood of that behavior or attitude will continue. For instance, if a student diligently studies for an important exam and receives an A on the exam, the likelihood of continuing the same behavior would remain the same. On the other hand, if a student was caught cheating on a final exam, and the punishment was not only a failing grade on the final, but also for their overall class grade, the likelihood of this behavior would typically decrease and hopefully be eliminated entirely. It is important to consider when examining an individual's response toward norms and sanctions that the response is motivated by perceptions of cultural values and priorities. Each of us possesses a set of personal values in addition to sharing a set of general values as members of society. Personal values are a set of personal principles, standards, concepts, beliefs, and ideas that can be used to make everyday decisions. Personal values develop from circumstances surrounding us and can change over time. For example, people who apply their values appropriately regardless of arguments or negative comments from others are said to have integrity. Values are applied appropriately when they're applied in the right area. For example, it would be appropriate to apply religious values in times of happiness as well as in times of despair. Understanding and recognizing our personal values and interests is important to assist us in making healthy and responsible decisions for our future. Personal values are entirely related to choice. They guide decisions by allowing for an individual's choices to be compared to the associated values of each choice. Personal values are not universal. One's family, nation, generation, and historical environment will help determine one's personal values. This is not to say that the value concepts themselves are not universal, but that each individual possesses a unique view of them. For instance, a personal knowledge of the appropriate values for their own genes, feelings, and experience. Cultural values are values that are largely shared by the culture's members. The values identify those objects, conditions, or characteristics that members of the society consider important, that is, valuable. In the United States, for example, values might include religion, extended family, children, education, community, friendship, and collectivism. The values of a society can often be identified by noting which people receive honor or respect. Values are related to the norms of a culture, but they are more general and abstract than norms. Norms are rules for behavior in specific situations, while values identify what should be judged as good or bad. Flying the national flag on a holiday is a norm, but it reflects the value of patriotism. This action reflects the values of respect and support of the military, friends, and family. Members take part in a culture even if each member's personal values do not entirely agree with some of the normative values sanctioned in the culture. This reflects an individual's ability to synthesize and extract aspects valuable to them from the multiple subcultures which they belong to. In the past 20 years, extensive efforts have been made to compare values in different nations, recognizing the challenges in interpreting value concepts in a similar manner across cultures. Around the world, an array of values can be observed ranging from widely shared values such as kindness and compassion that stem from the sense of forgiveness and loyalty to a much less supported value such as power, control, and dominance over people and resources. A sociological interest emerging in the 21st century relating to shared values is a rise in international conflicts. Some sociologists theorize that this clash of civilizations' main source of conflict is generated more by cultural and religious identities rather than national or political loyalties. Others argue that conflict over values is nothing new and therefore not at the center of the tension. Instead, the conflict is due to our human ability to create havoc and violence. When exploring two of the major theoretical perspectives in conjunction with culture and the dominant ideology, we see that the functionalists and conflict theorists agreeing that culture and society are mutually supportive, but they differ in reason for the support. Functionalists explain societal stability as an outcome of unified support from its members due to their apparent conformity to strong central values and common norms. Functionalists see a cultural trait or practice persisting only if the majority sees the function to be a necessary step toward societal stability and harmony. Conflict theorists agree with functionalists in that a common culture can exist, but argue that the culture's purpose serves to maintaining privileges of certain groups rather than stability of the whole. By protecting their self-interests, powerful groups have the ability to keep other groups in a submissive role. Conflict theorists define the term dominant ideology as a set of cultural beliefs and practices that helps maintain powerful social, economic, and political interests. From a conflict perspective, the dominant theory goes beyond controlling wealth and property and can even control the means of producing beliefs about reality through religion, education, and media. A number of social scientists report it is not an easy task to identify a core culture in the U.S. They relay this insight to the limited consensus on national values, the diffusion of cultural traits, and the diversity within our culture and the changing views of our young people. Regardless, we must recognize that certain expressions of values have greater influence than others, even in as complex a society as the United States. In closing, let's review today's presentation. We have defined culture and introduced the basic elements connected to culture. We defined culture as the totality of learned, socially transmitted customs, knowledge, material, and behavior. We examined the basic elements connected to culture, which include cultural universals, ethnocentrism, and cultural relativism. We explored different categories of cultures within a society, which are referred to as subcultures and countercultures. We discussed how culture expands through the processes of innovations, which both include discovery and invention. We discovered that diffusion is the means in which cultural items are spread from one place to another. We examined language as an important element of the transmission of culture, with its ability to create speech, written characters, numerals, and symbols, in addition to gestures and other nonverbal communication. We looked at how sociologists distinguish norms in two ways by classifying them as formal and informal, as mores and as folkways. We also looked at sanctions and their roles in keeping norms a viable part of societal stability. Our last exploration consisted of learning about values, both cultural and personal, and how they are connected to the concept of dominant ideology. This is the end of Chapter 3, Part 3. Be sure you have viewed all 3 parts.